Hello everyone. In today's video, I'll show you how to create this beautiful cherry cupcake sparkler in Procreate. I will guide you through each process by sharing my techniques to bring this beautiful cherry cupcake sparkler to life. Whether you just bought your iPad and just starting with Procreate or an advanced skilled artist, these tips will help you take your art to the next level. All the brushes and canvases I've used will be found in the description below. You can also download the free sketch and color palette there as well. For today's demonstration, I'll be using the rough grooved canvas, but you can use any canvas you like. As you can see, I have already imported the sketch and it's in the Layers tab. And all the layers that we'll be using to paint will be underneath the sketch, as well as the watercolor texture canvas effect. And if you downloaded and imported the color palettes available, they are already all in order and will be available for you guys to use. So we'll start from the top, the cream of the cupcake at the bottom, and finish it off with the sparkler on the top. Perfect for New Year's. So we will start with picking this red tone color and using the wet on dry brush, keeping the opacity and the size of the brush 100%. So to be a bit more accurate, I like to focus on painting the outlines first and then filling the general area with ease. So I'll go all the way around with the cherry first with the light tone color, and then I'll add the different tone colors later on. And if you're enjoying these tutorials, hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and you'll be notified when a new video gets released. We're just going to leave the stem part alone and empty for now. And once that first layer is completed, we're going to create a new layer and use the second tone color that's a little bit darker from this cherry tone color. And to create some depth, we're going to add it in the center. And then go all the way around to the left side, leaving the right side open a little bit because the sparkler is going to be brightening up the cherry. Since the sparkler is coming from the right, it's going to be a little bit lighter on the right. So again, we're going to create a new layer and add the darkest tone now for the cherry. This idea originated from our cherry tree that we have in our backyard. It produced one of the most delicious cherries that we had. And to celebrate the new year, I wanted to add this cherry with the stem having a sparkler effect, with a beautiful cherry that's reflecting the shine of the sparkler. And of course, who doesn't like cupcakes? And don't forget to add some of the darker tones in the center of the pit, because it is a lot more deeper and grooved inside the center. And we'll blend it later on after we complete all the lighter and the midtones for the cupcake. So we're going to create a new layer and work on the stem color of the green tone. And just like this, we're going to focus on the center of this pit. And we're going to add another darker tone color, but we're not going to create a new layer because it's such a small area that it's not going to make a big difference. And now we're going to focus on making the frosting of the creamy, rich cupcake. It's going to be a pink tone color, so we're going to create a new layer and pick this tone color, keeping the size and the brush size 100%. And like we did before, we're going to focus on the outer layers, first like this, all the way around, which will make it easier for you to paint the center. I like to do it with a single stroke, but you can add multiple strokes. The brush will have some transparency, so you might see some overlayers if you do add some. But no worries, you can go back and use the moving blender or the regular blender to mix them together. And I just created a new layer again and added a mid-tone color now. And I'm going to focus in the areas where they will be shadowed from the sparkler that's shining from the right, so it's going to add some depth. Just like this by adding some depth on the left side. It's going to be a little bit folded on the right side, so it's going to be a bit darker there. as well as on the right side of the corner of the cherry. Add another mid-tone layer between the separation of the two icing from the top and the bottom. Now we'll focus on the cake base. So we're going to create a new layer, and I picked the original color of a light brown tone color and start from the top, going all the way along the lines, and at the bottom I'm going to add a little bit of grooves like this. Don't worry if you go over the lines, we can use the eraser tool to make it a little bit more accurate. And now we're going to add another layer that is a mid-tone color. So we're going to create a new layer just underneath the icing frosting here. And now we're going to paint the cupcake liner. So we're going to use the same color that we used for the frosting to keep the colors a bit more cohesive, but we're going to add a little bit of purple in it. So again, we're going to add a light tone layer all the way around the lines like this. And now fill in the grooves just like this in between the liner. And simply fill in the insides just like this. Now create a new layer, and we're going to add a mid-tone purple tone color on the outsides of this cupcake liner. Again, since the light is reflecting from the sparkler on the right side, it's going to be darker on the left side. This will create a lot of depth and realism to this cupcake. And also painting on the right side, making it a little bit more 3D effect, just like this. And to make it even more realistic, we're going to add another tone layer that is a bit darker now on the furthest sides of the cupcake to make it a bit more rounder in shape. Now it's time to start blending them all together. So we're going to keep things separate. So using your fingers, we're going to pinch the layers like this. We're going to keep the cherries together, the stem together, the frosting. By keeping them separate, we'll be able to avoid smudging the colors too much. Once you're completing combining them each, you should have at least 5 layers like this. So we'll start from the top, and we'll select that layer of the cherry and start blending the cherries together. So we'll be using the moving blender, keeping the size to around 25%. And focusing on blending 2-tone colors at a time to avoid over smudging. Just wiggling left and right, up and down like this. It's helpful to go into one direction rather than going back and forth. This will allow the moving blender to blend smoothly and evenly. Now select that stem layer that we have to mix in the colors using the same moving blender. We're going to reduce the size to around 6% because it's a small area, like this. Now select that frosting layer that we made, keeping the brush size around 25%. And again, we're adding 2-tone colors at a time, blending them like this, going in one direction. Don't overthink it, just keeping it simple. And now we're focusing on the sponge cake at the bottom. blend in the two-tone colors, selecting that layer. And lastly, we're going to focus on mixing the cupcake liner. So select that layer of the liner that we made and blend in the two-tone colors like this. And you can reduce the size a little bit to keep it a little bit more accurate on the corners that are a little bit more difficult. And sometimes I like to mix in the colors, so we'll use the regular blender and keeping the size around 40%. And we're just going to drag in some of the colors to make it a little bit more uneven, like the realistic watercolor mixture of paint. They're very unpredictable, but that's the beauty of how they come out sometimes. Now we're going to add another layer to make the liners stand out a little bit more. So we're going to create a new layer on top of the layers that we have. Use this darker tone color of the purple and use the wet on dry brush, keeping the size to around 45%. And we're just going to focus on drawing some of these lines like this of the liner. This will create a little bit more depth because we're going to remove the sketch later on, giving a very unique look. And sometimes I like to leave spaces open to make it a bit more realistic, to show that the liners are not perfectly aligned with perfect grooves. And the lines are going to be a little bit lighter and thinner in the center and a bit thicker on the outside to make it a little bit more dark, creating more depth. And I'll go over it one more time to make it a little bit thicker on the sides, getting less light from the sparkler. Now we're going to go back using the moving blender and blend in some of the lines that we just created to make it a bit more natural looking, avoiding harsh lines. But make sure we have that layer that we have created the liners, keeping the size to around 20% and just going around all the way down like this. Slightly blending them, wiggling it around to give a more natural look of the watercolor effect. And dragging some of the colors up too. And now we're going to create a new layer and use the wet on dry brush, keeping the opacity to around 45%. And we're going to create some watercolor stain looks from the liners. And just like this, focusing on the darker areas where we had the midtones and the dark tones. We can even reduce the opacity slightly and then focusing on a little bit more of the centerpieces. This will make it a little bit more transparent, but leave hard edges on the sides like this. And now we're going to create a new layer, and we're doing the same thing with the cupcake sponge area. So pick that dark tone color of the brown that we used for the mid-tone color, and use the wet on dry brush again, keeping the opacity around 40%, 100% size, and just focusing on the darker tone colors like this, leaving the right side a bit brighter. And again, we're going to create another layer and use the pink dark tone color that we have, keeping the opacity to around 60% to keep a little bit darker and focusing on the watercolor stain look of the mid-tone colors and the dark tone. And now the cherry part, we're going to create another layer and pick this dark tone color that we used for the cherry, keeping the opacity to around 40% and 100% size, and just focusing on the edges like this, leaving the right side open so the sparkler is going to be brightened up. But just go around it and focusing on the center of it, creating more depth. Now we'll focus on the cherry, where we'll have a nice light reflection from the sparkler. So we're going to pick a yellow tone color like this, and use the gouache brush and focusing on the right side like this, looping it around of a fairly large size of the yellow tone color to create a bit more ambient glow. And it's going to be a little bit bright on the left side as well from the light reflection coming from the side. And now once we're completed that, we're going to pick a white tone color and create a small white tone color in the center. And once we're done that, we're going to use our fingers and pinch them together and use the regular blender now, keeping the size to around 15%. And we're going to first drag out the color like this from the yellows to the red, pushing it outwards like this. Same thing with the left top side as well. And now keeping the size around 50%, pushing outwards the white to the yellow, like this. This white and yellow tone creates this nice, bright tone color. Almost like it's too bright. A beautiful reflection of the sparkler. Now it's time to focus on the sparkler. Again, pick this yellow tone color that we have, and we're going to use a free brush that comes with the default brush set from Procreate called the Light Pen. Keeping the opacity and size 100%, and just follow these lines, dragging them out from the center like this. And now we're going to create an orange tone color. Save this color for you guys. And same thing, we're going to focus on the outer end. A bit broken like it's sparkling outside. Leaving some small lines will give this effect. Go all the way around. And now we can create a new layer at the bottom here and use the soft pledge, keeping the size around 30%. And we're just going to go around creating some of that background tone color of the orange. And now use the yellow tone again, but we're going to use a lighter tone color, just pushing out the colors to make it a little bit more brighter. And just go all the way around. And then combine the two layers that we have, use the eraser tool, and you should be using the fine line brush this time, and creating some more of that star feeling in the center, pushing out the colors. And not forgetting the stem. Using the fine line brush, we're going to create a stem burnt look by keeping the opacity to around 50%. Keeping the opacity around 50%, and we're going to create the stem that's been burnt. And just like that, kind of like a birthday cake. Now use the regular blender, keeping the size around 5 to 7%, dragging it in a little bit like it's fading away. Since the sparkler is brightening everything up, we have to add some sparkle light reflections on the cupcake. So we're going to pick this yellow bright tone color. We can use that same layer that we used for the light sparkler and use the light pen again. Keeping the opacity around 50% and size 100%. And since the light's coming out right at the bottom, we're going to put some layers of the light tone right underneath it. And some of the corners of the frosting like this. And some parts of the cupcake sponge like this. And since we have some light, we're going to create some shadows. So we're going to pick this dark blue tone color using the wet on dry brush. And you can follow along the sketched areas like this to create a little bit of shadow. And then we're going to add another darker tone layer like this to create more depth. And there you have it, beautiful Cherry Sparkler Cupcake. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and had a wonderful year being creative. And I hope that next year will be even better. And I'm hoping to create more brushes for you guys and more tutorials to come along with it. And if you wish to continue painting with me, click on the next video and I'll see you there.